The reason I was keen to get Patti Smith to talk here this year, firstly, I've always been a fan of her, not just her music, but her persona as a sort of kind of punk priestess. Along with Lou Reed, I think she represents the American punk thing that happened. But more specifically this year, earlier this year, I read Just Kids. And I have to say that along with Dylan's Chronicles, it's by far the best music book I've ever read. Mainly because it's beautifully written. It is elegantly written and it's heartfelt. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So I thought it would be a really good time for her to come along and talk to us. I knew she was articulate. I've seen her speak on things before, but now with the book revealing so much about her, not in a salacious tell-all way, but in a human way, I thought she was perfect for here. And from the response I've had so far, that would seem to be the case. Last year with Yoko, which was a kind of controversial choice, I knew Yoko, I'd met her, and I knew, firstly, she was highly intelligent. Secondly, she was very pro-women and very interesting and gets the music business in a strange way. So we've tried to get music icons, and in a similar way, Patti has this, she's gone through like a metamorphoses, different stages, and people have different images of her, picking up on the time that they sort of liked her best. And I'd like to find out from her how she feels about those. This is a woman who's had tremendous reversals and hugely significant deaths. I mean, Mapplethorpe being the obvious one, but also her husband, Fred Sonic Smith, and, you know, members of her band, members of her tight community dying around her, and a very modest beginning, and her ability to survive, which is literally what it was in that New York, which was probably New York at its most dangerous, as a young, in some ways, ingenue, and to come through it, and to carry that into her music, but also into her poetry. She is a poet, a genuine, strong, good poet who understands poetry. And, you know, Blake is one of her favourites, who's had a similar, in many ways, similar background, and has perhaps not been as appreciated as either her or Blake should be. I think that music is so integral to communication, both on a general scale. It's the most universal language. Art, I would think, is the second most universal language. And it is so much a part of, if you take commercials, overall in the world, between 70 and 80% of commercials have a music track in them. And yet in some ways, when we began this 5 years ago, there probably wasn't anything featuring that business side of music. And so I thought it would be a good idea to get people who understood both music in its most general sense and marketing themselves and creating an icon. I think that everyone who we've spoken to, from Donovan upwards, who was our first person, understands how their impact, not of just their music, but their persona, what they say, is a creation that's kind of outside of themselves. And if you take Stevie Van Zandt, what fascinated me about him was he was also a member of the Sopranos team, and there was his wife along with him. She came along to the thing, who's his wife in the Sopranos. How does that affect him as being Springsteen's sidesman? I find that fascinating. I think that if you take John Legend, who is incredibly conscious of his position within R&B and within the old Stax, Tamla tradition, how has he modernised that? This is a man who was, I think, a Yale or Harvard graduate, very smart and very conscious of how he appeared. And of course, of all of them, Tony Bennett, whose son, really re-engineered him, absolutely got him out of the boondocks and put him over by getting him dressed up as a clown or something at the MTV Awards. He only did it the once, but it brought him back. That's pure marketing. And I think to survive in the music industry, well, no longer is it a given that just by selling a few records, and I mean a few records, or even a few tracks on iTunes, you need to have a presence, which is why people tour now, and why they are so much part of televisual and, of course, net presence, because they know they need to be there. And to do that, in its purest terms, that is pure marketing. So these people who have become legends know very well how. I mean, Lady Gaga is the obvious example, but it goes right back to why McCartney of the Beatles was the best self-publicist. And I think that there's been this tradition. And it seemed to me that it wouldn't be a bad thing for us to examine and learn from them. Nothing I do in the year do I enjoy as much as that hour with these people, because I learn so much. Every year I think, oh, well, I think I've heard this. You don't. It's always different. And I know Patty, and I know she will be very different.